here. Welcome to the Secret Restaurant Podcast once again. Welcome back to it. Today we're going to talk about something a little bit more serious, straying away from the usual topics of joy and celebration, which this podcast has become known and beloved for having nonstop. We're going to talk about something very serious today, something that many people struggle with. And a lot of people probably know someone who struggles with this, maybe even someone very close to you, and that is the addiction to recording podcasts. When does it end? I think it's more important to think about when it starts and when it keeps on happening in the middle, and studying these things and figuring out how we can help people to curb the rapid accelerating need to stand and talking to your phone by yourself for 20 minutes at a time. It has been interesting looking at my old podcast because I do listen to the old ones one time when I attach them to the end of the new ones. So I'll go back and listen to them, and it's interesting to see how bad I was. I did have a different phone back then too, which I think this microphone's better, but yeah, I had the same phone. I had like an iPhone 8 for honestly 6 years, and then finally got a new one, and it did actually change the sound of things. It changed like my recordings of my short videos where I'm reading poems too. I had that phone for a very long time, and it was like one speaker wasn't working anymore, and when I called my girlfriend on the phone, it sounded like she was trapped inside a balloon when she was talking to me sometimes. It was at the end of its legs. End of its legs. Is that an expression? It was at its feet. It was at its socks. What the fuck? So yeah, I've been really at the end of my socks lately. Just getting sick of, honestly. Let me try that again. Oh, hey, Nate. How have you been lately? Oh, I've just been at the end of my fucking socks lately, man. All right. I can't do it. So yeah, really, I think that I'm only recording this out of a strange OCD that there's only 2 recordings on Spotify right now. But I'll tell you what, though, by the end of this podcast, you are going to be checking in next week, too. You are going to be really enthusiastic about what sort of new ideas I come with, new expressions, things like calling reels joggers, and you'll really be feeling at the end of your socks with all other podcasts because of the sort of feat that you are witnessing, the tremendous feat that is the Secret Restaurant Podcast. All right, let's move on. So I shared my favorite books I've read this year so far since January on Instagram, and a lot of them I have talked about on this podcast already. But I'll try and cover the rest of them over the upcoming episodes real soon. It is interesting, though, because on the throwback ones that I've shared, I was reading Harry Crews a year ago, and now I'm reading Harry Crews again. I finally picked up the book, The Gospel Singer, which is his debut novel, and I was actually kind of surprised after already starting it to learn that it was published in 1969. It doesn't really feel like it's a book that's that old, except maybe little parts of the actual it takes place in 1969, obviously. So there's probably some stuff, and then like he's an author that is. It seems like he's pretty respected by all writers, especially writers of color, and he's a white man, and he writes about race a lot, but from his introductions to his books and from like me reading about him, his perspective as a white person seems like it's one that's positively engaging in literature in a way that's discussing race. But that being said, he's from the South, and his first book was published in 1969, so there is a lot of racism in it, and there was a lot of racism in his book, The Knockout Artist, that I read first. Not that he as a writer is making mistakes, but things like characters using slurs frequently, things like that. Which I did read. So this, I know, I have a hard time not like continually like assuring people that I know who I am and know that I'm a white person or whatever. But my perspective, I read just because, when you have discussions of race, inherently it's about like skin, right? And Harry Crews, I read, he actually, oh, this doesn't sound bad, but he actually had an accident where his skin was burned. And so he had like burns on his skin for his whole life. And so I kind of wonder if that experience played a part in him being more curious about writing about characters that are outcasted or disrespected or have their treatment be due to their skin. I wonder if that was kind of part of his career, because I think he had like an accident when he was young that his skin was burned. I need to read more about that. But this book, The Gospel Singer, I've only read about 70 pages and it's 200 pages, so it'll probably be, I'll talk about it twice. But the opening scene, it starts in the POV of, I wish I had the book right now so I could know the character's name, but it's a black man who has been accused of killing a white woman. And he doesn't think, or I mean, he everyone's telling him that he did it, but it's basically suggested that he didn't. But regardless of the time, because of the times, 1969 in the South, it wasn't exactly going to be a fair trial. And that's the opening scene. And then it shifts to this gospel singer who's coming home, and he's a white person, and he's coming home to the South, and he's kind of become a celebrity because of his singing voice. And he's coming home, and then we learn that his kind of childhood crush, or like his kind of hometown girl, is actually the person who was murdered, but he didn't know that. And then he knows this person that's on trial for it or accused of it too. And so I think it's going to come together where, like, he's even said, the gospel singer has even said he doesn't believe it. And so I imagine I don't know if it's going to be a tragedy or if it's going to have a hopeful ending or whatever. But that's sort of even in the first like 40, 50 pages. I'm not really giving away too much there. But just going back to the craft of it, I still stand by. I think it's surprising that it was written in 1969. I haven't read like a ton of books from that time, but I've read quite a few. And I think that probably Harry Crews' style is much closer to contemporary literature now than it was back then. I think he probably was ahead of his time in the way he told stories and the way he wrote. Just like the way that he wrote scenes, I mean. Because, language changes. And I think when I think about the late 60s, early 70s, it was more grand. It was more like trying to write impressive sentences and impressive stories. And Harry Crews, I don't think he was interested in trying to be impressive. I think he was interested in trying to write things that were powerful in different ways, like using realism more as opposed to how good of a writer he can be, or like how impressive of a writer he can be. He used realism, and he used kind of grit and realness to kind of convey his story, as opposed to trying to write like an epic that academics would swoon over, so to speak. A lot of his books have been out of print, though, and it's only been in the last maybe 5 years or so that they started printing them as Penguin Classics. So this one I'm reading, The Gospel Singer, I think probably was the first Penguin Classic that they re-released because it was his first novel. And then they did The Knockout Artist last year, and then he's also got his autobiography. I think it's called A Childhood, but I haven't read it. And you can still find his books, but honestly, all of them, I think all the other ones are out of print pretty much, or they have been, which is unfortunate. I think it kind of makes him one of the very incredibly underrated writers who have ever lived, because the fact that you can't just go find these books, you can only find these three in a bookstore. You can't find all the other ones. It's kind of a tragedy. But I was lucky enough to get them all not all of them. I got a bunch of them because, my uncle actually gave me probably 4 of them a while back. And that's how I discovered him. That's how I found The Knockout Artist. And I read that one first, and it was still out of print then. So here's to looking forward. If any publishers, Penguin Classics, hear this, you got to keep doing your thing. You got to keep putting those back out, because I think he's a writer that deserves to be read, and he's been overlooked. And I think a lot of contemporary writers now who I read would find a lot of things similar with his style as theirs. And I think they would also even probably be able to improve and learn more about what they want to do just by reading Harry Crew's work. So anyway, this is usually where I talk about secret restaurant updates, which there are none. I have kind of not done a whole lot with the press since February or what. Oh, wait, no. So whatever the last pizza was, April or March or something. But the summer issue will come out. So you can look forward to that. Otherwise, there's back issues. I think I probably have maybe 3 to 5 issues of each of the pizza issues, which you can get on eBay from our shop. So they're like $8, or some of them are $7. And they actually coincidentally include some of the greatest writing of all time. So if you're interested, you should check those out. They're like, hey, I know. So I put it on Spotify. Now I'm like imagining more people viewing it, which probably everyone who listens to this probably already knows me. But if you haven't seen them, they're like 20-page zines, and they're hand bound, and I mail them to you. And we do 4 a year. So pretty cool, pretty badass. All right, moving on. I can't remember if I have talked about Octavia E. Butler on this podcast yet, but I don't think that I have. So of my 8 books that I chose for the favorite ones I read from January through June, or to now, one of them that I have not talked about yet is Wild Seed by Octavia E. Butler. And this is the second book that I read by her. The first one I read was Parable of the Sower. And it's very, very usual for me to read the first books of series and then not the second ones. So coincidentally, I've read 2 books of hers from different series. I don't know if that matters or not, but there's kind of some like overarching themes though. They were written kind of far apart. I think they were written maybe 10 to 20 years apart, the 2 that I've read. And this Wild Seed one was written earlier. But both of them in their fantasy, or in their science fiction fantasy, this one's more fantasy than sci-fi actually, now that I think about it. But both of them have kind of a certain type of entity that's like an empath. So Parable of the Sower, it's the main character that is in first person, so it's a lot more prominent, and that one would probably be easier to discuss the concept. But there's also the same sort of special power in Wild Seed too, and so basically what it is you can feel other people's pain, like literally same level, perfectly matched. If you're around someone in pain, you also feel it completely. So with Parable of the Sower, it being first person and the main character, it's like easier to kind of understand it, I think. But basically it's to the point. It's where these types of people with this power, they can't even commit self-defense, because if they are attacked and then they turn around and defend themselves and hurt the person who's attacking them, then immediately they'll feel all the pain that they inflicted upon the person who they're trying to defend themselves from. It's pretty fascinating. I think that it's one of those instances where fantasy kind of she's considered a science fiction writer, but it feels like fantasy to me. It's one of those instances where it's sort of like, it feels like it's almost like an autobiographical fantasy, or like a self-analyzing fantasy, because like it's kind of clear to me that since there's these two main characters that have this skill, I imagine that Octavia E. Butler had a great understanding of empathy. I sort of wonder what other running themes of sort of powers and things like that are in her other books. The Wild Seed one is a lot more. The world is a lot more unlike our Earth, or the characters are not human, I guess, because there's like shapeshifters and immortals and stuff like that. It was kind of actually challenging, like Parable of the Sower was the first one I read, and it is basically about an environmental crisis, and it's about the main character, who is sort of the empathetic character. It's a narrative that's kind of like the catastrophe is happening outside, and like outside of her community, and like resources are dwindling, and then finally it gets to the point that their community collapses and they have to leave, and then it's kind of her trying to find salvation in that way. Perhaps some religious symbolisms in it, but also, environmental catastrophe is a topic of discussion very frequently. But this Wild Seed one is actually a lot more complicated to me. It basically begins with this woman who's sort of like a spiritual member of her community. We learn that she's an immortal. And then she gets sought out by a man who has this same, he's also immortal, but he's like a villainous immortal. And he basically persuades her, I think by threatening her family even, that she has to come with him. And then essentially the reason he wants to align with her is because he actually wants her to breed like a superior race with the other people that he recruits. So it's kind of, historically, it's like examining certain aspects of history probably, or making sense of them and the evils of it. But it's also interesting because she is a shapeshifter, and she can shapeshift into animals or even different humans. So this villainous supernatural man is trying to utilize her abilities, utilize her shape-shifting abilities, and then also utilize her immortal abilities to kind of form a superior race. There were a lot of interesting commentaries, and I feel like Octavia E. Butler, she was a black woman, and she writes about race through the lens of fantasy and science fiction. And I feel like she writes about it in a way that's like it's a lot of pride. Like her characters have a lot of pride in who they are. Like, for example, this Wild Seed book, The Shapeshifter Woman, technically she can shapeshift into whoever she wants. Like she becomes like a dolphin, all this other stuff. She can shapeshift into a man, which of course, that's sort of like another subcategory that we could talk about with like sexualities and stuff. But she can also shapeshift into different races, but she chooses not to, for the most part. There's like a scene where like she's supposed to be partnered with this white man, and he asks her if she can shapeshift into a white woman. And of course, at first, because it's like she's offended by it, and then he explains because he used to have a white wife or something, but like she still doesn't want to do it because it's like that's not who she is. There's like kind of stuff like that that kind of go along with the theme of kind of pride and yeah, I guess I'm kind of not fully, the thought's not fully realized for me, so I'll probably have to think about it some more. And if the other books I read by her kind of have the same concepts, then I'll definitely come back to this one, or maybe I'll just talk about it anyway. But oh, when I ordered it, it was signed by her. That was crazy because she passed away. I'm not sure when, but a while ago, and it had her signature on it. To Brad, good reading. Which I guess if it's signed to someone, it's not worth as much. But I wasn't gonna sell it anyway. It's more valuable if it's just a signature, apparently. But I'm going to read more of her stuff because I actually found at the Half Price Books in South Bend, I found one of her trilogies, which had an interesting publishing history. So it's 3 books, and it's called the Xenogenesis, Xenogenesis. That includes 3 novels, so maybe this will be the first time that I actually read a whole series. And the novels are Dawn, Adulthood Rights, and Imago. Anyway, the publishing history of this book is that it was published as a trilogy called Xenogenesis, Xenogenesis, and then it came out as re-released under a different title, and then it came out re-released a third time with Xenogenesis and the other title, both in the title. But I found a hardcover edition of the first trilogy released, which they referred to as an omnibus. Shout out to graphic novels. But I don't know. It wasn't too expensive. But it's cool that I found this old copy of it with a cool cover of an alien over the shoulder of a young lady. All right, I think that's all I've got for today. Let me see what is the next throwback episode. The next one up will be from August 28th, 2024, which from the description on YouTube seems like we're talking about old Stevie King. All right, that's it. I will talk to you guys later.